The Wheel of Time is a series of epic fantasy novels written by American author James Oliver Rigney, Jr., under the pen name Robert Jordan. Originally planned as a 6-book series, The Wheel of Time now spans 14 volumes, in addition to a prequel novel and a companion book. Jordan began writing the first volume, The Eye of the World, in 1984 and it was published in January 1990. The author died in 2007 while working on what was planned to be the 12th and final volume in the series, although he had prepared extensive notes so another author could complete the book according to his wishes. Fellow fantasy author and longtime Wheel of Time fan Brandon Sanderson was brought in to complete the final book, but during the writing process it was decided that the book would be far too large to be published in one volume, and would instead be published as 3 volumes, The Gathering Storm, Towers of Midnight and A Memory of Light. The series draws on numerous elements of both European and Asian mythology, most notably the cyclical nature of time found in Hinduism and Buddhism, the concepts of balance and duality, and a respect for nature found in Taoism. Additionally, its creation story has similarities to Christianity's creator, and Shaitan, the Dark One. It was also partly inspired by Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace. The Wheel of Time is notable for its length, its detailed imaginary world, its well-developed magic system and a large cast of characters. The 8th through 14th books each reached number 1 on the New York Times bestseller list. As of August 14, 2008 the series has sold over 44 million copies worldwide and has spawned a computer game, role-playing game and a soundtrack album. The television and film rights to the series have been optioned several times, most recently by Universal Studios. Setting in the series is mythology, a deity known as the Creator made the universe and the Wheel of Time, which governs experience. The wheel has 7 spokes, each representing an age or phase of history, and it rotates under the influence of the One Power, which flows from the true source composed of male and female halves. Humans who can use this power for telepathy or psychokinesis are called channelers. The principal organization thereof in the books are the Isti or Servants of All. The Creator having imprisoned its antithesis, Shaitan, an Isti experiment mistakenly allowed Shaitan's influence into the world. Thereafter he is the story's principal antagonist, promising power and immortality to those who abet his total freedom. A century after the initial breach of the Dark One's prison, open warfare occurs between the forces of the Dark One and those of the Light, until the chieftain Luzthrin Telemann, alias the Dragon, led a force of channelers and soldiers to reseal the prison. Whereupon the Dark One inflicted a malediction driving male channelers of the One Power insane. Thus affected, the male channelers created earthquakes and tsunami altering numerous landscapes, and therefore called the breaking of the world. Luzthrin himself killed his friends and family, and was known afterwards as Kinslayer. Given a moment of sanity by Ishmael, chief among the Dark One's servants, Luzthrin commits suicide. Thereafter the female Isti reorganize society, and nullify male access to the power. 2 subsequent events are important to the novel's principal story, the Trolloc Wars, in which servants of the Dark One foment a continuous war for several hundred years. And the War of the 100 Years, a devastating civil war succeeding the fall of a continent-spanning empire ruled by the High King, Arthur Hawkwing. When the novels begin, most people live in a technology and culture roughly comparable to that of Europe's 1450 to 1600, in fear of a prophecy that the Dark One will break from his prison and the dragon will be reborn to face him. Plot summary: the prequel novel New Spring takes place during the Aeol War and depicts the discovery by the Isti that the dragon has been reborn. The series proper commences almost 20 years later in the Two Rivers, a near-forgotten district of the country of Anda. An Isti, Moiraine, and her ward Elan, arrive in the village of Emansfield, secretly aware that servants of the Dark One are searching for a young man living in the area. Moiraine is unable to determine which of 3 youths is the dragon reborn, and leads all 3 of them from the Two Rivers, along with their friend Ignaliver. Nine of Almiara, the village wise woman, later joins them. Gleeman Marilyn also travels with the group. The first novel depicts their flight from various agents of the Shadow and their attempts to reach the Isti city of Tar Valon. Thereafter the protagonists are frequently split into different groups and pursue different missions toward the cause of the Dragon Reborn, sometimes thousands of miles apart. As they struggle to unite the various kingdoms against the Dark One's forces, their task is complicated by rulers of the nations who refuse to lose their autonomy. By the Zealots styling themselves the Children of the Light, who do not believe in the prophecies. And by the Seanchan, the descendants of a long-lost colony of Arta Hawkwing's empire. The Isti also become divided on how to deal with the Dragon Reborn. As the story expands, new characters representing different factions are introduced. Tarmangaddon, deriving its name from that of Armageddon in Christian eschatology, Tarmangaddon is the apocalyptic battle wherein the Dragon Reborn opposes Shaitan, while their followers fight elsewhere. Events and portents that foreshadow the last battle take place in Knife of Dreams and the Gathering Storm. The last battle takes place in A Memory of Light. Special powers, channeling. Some men and women in the story have the natural ability to access a form of magic called the One Power. Through a process called channeling. The One Power consists of male and female halves called Saidin and Saidar. The One Power is further divided into the 5 powers: Earth, Water, Air, Fire, and Spirit. In addition to granting access to the One Power, the ability to channel greatly extends longevity and masks the effects of aging. Channeling itself is described as a euphoric, drug-like experience of life involving the enhancement of all senses, making ordinary life seem dull and grey. A contrary power, dubbed the True Power, is associated with Shaitan. Channelers can direct the power toward a desired purpose by creating one or more flows of the One Power and constructing weaves of these flows. An individual flow can only consist of one of the 5 powers, but a weave can combine any number of flows from any of the 5. Flows can be of varying sizes, with larger flows involving greater strength. Channelers, especially novices, are very careful to control the amount of the One Power they draw into their flows. Drawing too much can be fatal, or can burn out the channeler, severing their ability to access the One Power forever. Channelers can sense the power in others, and feel when a channeler has embraced Saidar or Saidin. It's also possible to sense the strength of a fellow channeler, defined as the potential amount of the One Power the channeler can draw and successfully weave without burning out. Flows and weaves are visible to fellow channelers but limited by the viewer's access to either Saidin or Saidar. This visibility allows channelers to learn how to construct specific weaves and access abilities merely by watching another channeler create the weave. While male and female channelers have access to many of the same abilities and end effects, the weaves and manner of their construction are often very different. The act of channeling Saidin is apparently very different from Saidar, whereas women describe surrendering themselves to the One Power and allowing it to flow through them, men insist that similar behavior would be suicidal. They describe channeling as a struggle for control that would result in their own destruction if they ever faltered. In general, males have greater strength in the power than women, but multiple female channelers can combine their strength by forming circles, with one channeler controlling and directing the weaves. Circles consisting of only females are limited to 13 members, while inclusion of male channelers allows the circle to grow to up to 72 members. Circles must always hold at least one more female than male, with a minimum of 1 man for every 12 women. As men tend to be much stronger in the power than women, the strongest circles consist of a near equal balance between the genders. Angreal artifacts can be constructed with the use of the One Power. Collectively known as Angreal, they are divided into 3 types: Angreal, Seangreal and Terangreal. Terangreal are distinguished by their use towards a specific effect or purpose, while Angreal and Seangreal simply magnify a user's inherent ability. Whereas Angreal and Seangreal can only be used by those with the ability to channel, some Terangreal can be used by non-channelers, although many require channeling to activate. Often, Seangreal are limited to users of either Saidin or Saidar. Kurendila, the strongest substance in existence, is created through use of the One Power and is generally regarded as indestructible, even through use of the power. Many, but not all, Angreal are constructed of Kurendila. Similarly, not all items made of Kandila are angreal. Isti, in the Age of Legends, both male and female channelers were collectively known as Isti and used the One Power together to great effect. At some point, the male half of the One Power was corrupted by Shaitan. Through continued exposure to this taint, male channelers go insane and ultimately die. The breaking of the world, marking the end of the Age of Legends, was instigated by male channelers driven mad by Shaitan's curse. Since that time, strength in the power has generally lessened, and knowledge of weaves and abilities, including the ability to create Angreal and Kandila, have been lost. At the time of the first book, fear of another breaking of the world and the dangers posed by Satan's corruption are so great that, while increasingly rare, male channelers are now a source of nightmares and terror to most people. The original symbol of the Isti, a circle separated into black and white halves by a sinuous line symbolizing both halves of the One Power, has been replaced by the flame of Tar-Valon, consisting only of the white half of the original symbol. The male half of the symbol, known as the Dragon's Fang, is used as a symbol of evil and a curse, often carved onto the doors of those accused of conspiring with the Dark Lord. The term Isti, used as a name, title and honorific, refers almost exclusively to female channelers, most often specifically referring to members of an exclusive society headquartered in the White Tower in Tar-Valon. Divided into several factions identified by color, known as Ajars, the Isti present a unified face to the world but often experience great internal conflict. They refer to each other as sisters, but maintain a rigid hierarchy of authority determined by custom and strength in the One Power. The modern Isti operate as self-appointed guardians of the One Power and are often viewed as above local and national politics. They view themselves as the rightful owners of all Angreal and arbiters of anything to do with the One Power. They operate as advisors to kings and queens and are shown deference by most. Some nations, however, have banned channeling and view Isti as suspect, if not outright evil. Isti search the world for the inherent ability to channel and bring any they find to the tower. Untrained channelers can be a danger to themselves and others, often resulting in accidental deaths. Channelers of a certain age that have survived without tower training are often derisively referred to as wilders by Isti. Wilders often experience blocks and inability to access the One Power except through specific rituals or in specific situations. In many instances these wilders have no idea they are channeling or accessing the One Power at all. With training and time, blocks can often be overcome and the wilder can channel at will. Foreign lands outside the Isti's purview often handle channeling and channelers quite differently from Isti custom and tend to distrust their assumed authority. Isti consider them wilders as well, and not entirely without reason. Most foreign channeling traditions have more specific and more limited understanding of the One Power than do Isti. Additionally, most of these traditions trace their origins back to offshoots of the original Isti split off after the breaking of the world. The Isti, however, can trace their history well back within the Age of Legends. One Ajar, the Red, is devoted to hunting down any and all male channelers and stripping them of their abilities. Removing a female's ability to access the One Power is known as stilling. The greatest form of White Tower punishment, Isti avoid even looking at the stilled as the mere idea of being separated from the One Power is so distasteful. Those who have been stilled, gentled or burned out experience deep depression and most often eventually die, wasting away in apathy. The Forsaken, 13 evil channelers committed themselves to Shaitan during the Age of Legends. Granted immortality by Shaitan, they were sealed in eternal prisons along with the Dark Lord. Now known as the Forsaken, they are extremely strong in the One Power and retain knowledge lost to the Age of Legends. Subsequently, they are formidable creatures, viewing most modern Isti as laughably weak. In competition with each for the Dark One's favor, the Forsaken distrust and fight each other as much as anyone else. The Forsaken refer to themselves as the Chosen. Other powers, not all powers in the Wheel of Time are related to the One Power or the ability to channel. Some are possessed with the ability to interpret dreams or use them to predict the future. Others can predict the future through waking visions or inspired knowledge. Some perceive auras with symbolic value, while others can communicate with animals in a telepathic manner. Teloranoid, a parallel world known as Teloranoid or the world of dreams, is accessible via channeling, while others can visit the world in their sleep. A reflection of the waking world, Teloranoid can be used to access knowledge about the state of the world, but can also be manipulated by the will of those present. Time, matter and space have still meaning within Teloranoid, allowing visitors to dream themselves to any location and take on any form, but actions occurring within the world of dreams can have effect on their real-world counterparts, including the injury or death of dreamwalkers. Another dream ability involves accessing a dimension between dreams, allowing one to access individuals' private dreams. While similar to the rules governing Teloranoid, visitors are much weaker and can become bound within the control of the person whose dream they inhabit. Unlike the world of dreams, however, the effects of the dream are confined to the dream itself and end upon the dreamer's waking. Books in the series, all paperback page totals given are for the most widely available mass-market paperback editions. The page count for the hardback editions do not include glossary or appendix page counts. There is also a prequel novella, New Spring and the Legends anthology edited by Robert Silverberg. Jordan expanded this into the standalone novel New Spring that was published in January 2004. Prior to his death, Jordan planned another 2 prequel novels and up to 3 outrigger novels taking place during or after the main series. He had only minimal notes prepared for these, and after the release of A Memory of Light it was ruled out that Brandon Sanderson or any other author will expand them into full novels. In 2002 the first book, The Eye of the World, was repackaged as 2 volumes with new illustrations for younger readers, From the Two Rivers, including an extra chapter before the existing prologue, and To the Blight with an expanded glossary. In 2004 the same was done with The Great Hunt, with the 2 parts being The Hunt Begins and New Threads in the Pattern. Prologue Ebooks, on several occasions, chapters from various books in the series were released several months in advance of publication. These were released in ebook format as promotional tools for the then upcoming release. To date, the Prologue ebook releases have included, Snow, the Prologue to Winter's Heart, Glimmers, the Prologue to Crossroads of Twilight, Embers Falling on Dry Grass, the Prologue to Knife of Dreams. What the Storm Means, the Prologue to The Gathering Storm. Chapter 1 of The Gathering Storm, Tears from Steel, was released on Friday, September 4, 2009 on Tor.com for free. Chapter 2 of The Gathering Storm, The Nature of Pain, was released in audio form on Thursday, September 24, 2009 on Tor.com for free. Distinctions, the Prologue to Towers of Midnight. Chapter 1 of Towers of Midnight, Apple's First, was released on Friday, October 1, 2010 on Tor.com for free. Chapter 2 of Towers of Midnight, Questions of Leadership was released in audio form on Tuesday, October 19, 2010 on Tor for free. Chapter 8 of Towers of Midnight, The Seven-Striped Lass. By Grace and Banners Fallen, the Prologue to A Memory of Light. A segment of Chapter 1 of A Memory of Light was released in mid-2012 on DragonMoan.com for free. A segment of Chapter 11 of A Memory of Light was similarly released publicly in mid-2012 on DragonMoan.com. Companion publications. There is a companion book to the series, entitled The World of Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time and published by Tor Books in November 1997, which contains much hitherto unrevealed background information about the series, including the first maps of the entire world and Ascension home continent. The book was co-written with Teresa Patterson. Jordan ruled the book broadly canonical, but stated that the book was written from the perspective of a historian within the Wheel of Time universe, and was prone to errors of bias and guesswork. Jordan also wrote a short story, Oe the Strike at Sheolula, which predates the main series by several thousand years. It was made available on the Internet and was later published in the world of Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time. Deleted portions for a specific character from Memory of Light will be published as a short story under the title Oe River of Salsa and Unfettered, New Tales by Masters of Fantasy in Spring 2013. Brandon Sanderson stated on Twitter that Harriet McDougall, Jordan's wife and editor, is creating a comprehensive Wheel of Time encyclopedia, to be published after A Memory of Light. Development. Writing and conception. In the early 1980s, Robert Jordan wrote several Conan the Barbarian novels for Tor Books, including a novelization of the movie Conan the Destroyer. These proved successful, and in 1984 he proposed an idea for an epic fantasy series of 3 books to Tom Doherty, the head of Tor Books. Doherty approved the idea. However, knowing that Jordan had a tendency to go long, put Jordan on contract for 6 books just in case. Jordan began writing the novel that became The Eye of the World. The novel proved extremely difficult to write, and characters and storylines changed considerably during the writing process. The series was originally centered on an older man who discovered relatively late in life that he was the chosen one who had to save the world. However, Jordan deliberately decided to move closer to the tone and style of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Fellowship of the Ring and made the characters younger and less experienced. Once this decision had been made, writing proceeded much more easily, and Jordan completed the 2nd volume, The Great Hunt, at roughly the same time the first book was published. Tom Doherty enjoyed The Eye of the World so much that he declared it would be the biggest fantasy series since Tolkien, and took the unprecedented steps of sending free review copies to every bookstore in the United States to generate interest. The combined hardcover and trade paperback run of the novel sold out of its initial 40,000-strong print run. Sales then doubled with the publication of the 2nd novel just 8 months later, generating more interest in the first book. Jordan wrote full-time at breakneck speed for the next several years until he completed the 7th volume, A Crown of Swords, at which point he slowed down, delivering a book every 2 years. Fans objected when he took some time off to expand a short story into a prequel novel called New Spring, so he decided to shelve his plans for additional prequels in favor of finishing off the last 2 volumes in the series. He rejected criticisms of the later volumes of the series slowing down in pace in order to concentrate on minor secondary characters at the expense of the main characters from the opening volumes, but acknowledged that his structure for the 10th volume, Crossroads of Twilight, had not worked out as he had planned. Knife of Dreams, the 11th volume, had a much more positive reception from critics and fans alike, and Jordan announced the 12th volume, which he had previously announced would have the working title A Memory of Light, would conclude the series. Author's death and final books. Jordan had stated that the main sequence would conclude with a 12th book, A Memory of Light. According to Forbes, Jordan had intended for it to be the final book even if it reaches 2,000 pages. Jordan was diagnosed with the terminal heart disease primary amyloidosis with cardiomyopathy in December 2005, and while he intended to finish at least A Memory of Light even if the worst comes to worst, he made preparations in case he was not able to complete the book. I'm getting out notes, so if the worst actually happens, someone could finish A Memory of Light and have it end the way I want it to end. With Jordan's death on September 16, 2007, the conclusion of the series was in question. On December 7 of that year, the publisher Tor Books announced that fantasy author Brandon Sanderson was to finish A Memory of Light. Sanderson, a longtime fan of the series, was chosen by Jordan's widow Harriet McDougall partly because she liked Sanderson's novels and partly because of a eulogy he had written for Jordan. On March 30, 2009, Tor Books announced that A Memory of Light would be split into 3 volumes. The first volume, The Gathering Storm, was released on October 27, 2009. The second, Towers of Midnight, was published on November 2, 2010. The final book of the series uses Jordan's original title, A Memory of Light. The book was published on January 8, 2013. Adaptations, games. Various game adaptations have been created. A Wheel of Time computer game was released in 1999. Over the course of the game, Alonisty must track down a robber following an assault on the White Tower, and prevent the Dark One from being released prematurely. She eventually learns of and executes a long-forgotten ritual at Sheol to ensure the Dark Lord remains sealed within the prison. While Robert Jordan was consulted in the creation of the game, he did not write the storyline himself, and the game is not considered canon. The Wheel of Time role-playing game was released in 2001 from Wizards of the Coast using the D20 rules developed for the 3rd edition of the Dungeons & Dragons game. The game had a single adventure module published in 2002, Prophecies of the Dragon. Shortly after the release of the adventure book, Wizards of the Coast announced they would not be releasing any further products for the game. Robert Jordan cited some problems with the role-playing game, such as storyline details in the adventure module which contradicted the books. In early 2009, EA Games announced that they have bought the rights for a game from Red Eagle Entertainment, who had started programming it a few months earlier. It's planned to be published through the EA Partners program. Several titles seem to be in the works, and one is said to be an MMORPG. No other information is available about the other titles at this time. Screenwriter Chris Morgan was recently hired by Red Eagle to work on this license. On February 12, 2010, it was announced that Obsidian Entertainment, developers of Neverwinter Nights 2, would be working with Red Eagle Games on the new Wheel of Time video game under the EA Partners program. This game will be released on the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and PC. There is no information at this time as to whether or not it will be one or a series of games. Television and film. In a 2000 chat on CNN.com, Robert Jordan mentioned that NBC had purchased an option to do a miniseries of The Eye of the World. But he expressed doubts that the series would be made, stating key people involved in getting that contract together have left NBC. On August 12, 2008, Variety reported that Universal Pictures had optioned the rights to produce feature film adaptations of the Wheel of Time books. He planned to adapt The Eye of the World as the first film. Music. The German power metal band Blind Guardian have written 2 songs dedicated to the Wheel of Time series as part of their 2010 album At the Edge of Time, Ride into Obsession, and Wheel of Time. Swedish heavy metal band Katana has a song entitled The Wisdom of Amanda S. Field on their 2012 album Storms of War. In 1999, a soundtrack for The Wheel of Time was released, featuring music by Robert Berry and inspired by the books. In the tradition of the literature-inspired symphonic poem, American composer Seth Stewart produced a full-scale orchestral work entitled Age of Legends, inspired by the eponymous era of myth and magic described throughout the Wheel of Time series. The orchestral piece was premiered and recorded in 2011 at historic Beale Concert Hall. Comic books. Double Brothers are adapting the series as comics, beginning with the prequel New Spring. The first issue was published, by Red Eagle Entertainment, in July 2005. The series was suspended after 5 of a planned 8 issues, with Red Eagle citing delays and changes to the creative team on the DB Pro end. That series resumed in 2009, and they also began publishing their adaptation of the first book of the series proper, The Eye of the World. On March 17, 2009, they showcased 10 pages of art from the prelude to the series The Wheel of Time, Eye of the World No. 0, Dragon Mounts on their website. Dynamite Entertainment have published 35 issues of the Wheel of Time, Eye of the World comic book series as of March 2013. Culture. Many fans of the Wheel of Time attend Dragon Con, which had an exclusive Wheel of Time content track from 2001 through 2012. The Wheel of Time now has its own annual convention, Jordan Con, which has been held annually in Atlanta, Georgia since 2009. See also, Wheel of Time locations, references. External links, Dragon Mount, Tor Books official Robert Jordan website, Brandon Sanderson's website.